Hey guys, welcome back. We're on day 5, and we're going to talk about fats. I want to follow up the protein discussion with fat because the two kind of go hand in hand. Most of our fat intake will come from our protein sources. So, for example, if you have chicken breast or fish and you're very careful about the preparation, you're going to know that that's a lower fat protein. If you have beef, you can prepare it in as lean a way as possible. You can drain all of the oil and grease and so forth and even press it out and rinse it off with hot water, and you can do those things, which really does dramatically reduce the fat. Or you could be in a restaurant with this huge fatty steak, prime rib, that kind of thing, and you could be eating something that's 5 or 6 times the amount of fat per ounce. So a lot of difference there. And one of the things that we often run into when we're talking about fat intake is, first of all, just the entire premise of, should I be eating a low-fat diet or a high-fat diet? It has become very in vogue, kind of for the maybe third time this has been rehashed, to be on a low-carb, high-fat diet. So all started way back, I think, in the early 50s, even before Dr. Atkins. He was kind of the second person to pick up on this and just promote this ketogenic type dieting. And now a lot of people are running with it in terms of whole foods instead of just being somebody who says I'm against carbs, but focusing on the fat. Let's get it from whole sources. So people are drinking whole milk and all these things, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But I first want to make the case that a low-fat diet is going to help you more than anything. Now, in reality, when you look at studies, a low-carb diet versus a low-fat diet, almost all of them have very tiny changes in the results when you compare them. So there are a substantial amount of studies that show indeed a low-carb, high-fat diet will help you lose weight the fastest, but it's always in a very acute way. In other words, you'll lose 5 pounds, 10 pounds, 20 pounds, but then those diets are the ones that have the fastest rebound in the highest rate of regain as just a percentage of people who regain. And so you'd have to ask yourself, okay, if that's so bad long term and it has the risk of suppressing metabolism and so forth, is it necessary or is it the best? And some people would say, well, as long as I can get those fast results, then I'm willing to risk it. I'll be one of the people who win. And unfortunately, there are a lot of other studies that say, not so fast. As soon as we control all of the variables in this research, in other words, this could be an inpatient study where people are actually given the right food for their subject group and nothing else. And that's exactly down to the line a perfect study of what's happening inside the body. If you don't do that, you're relying on self-reporting. So somebody says, oh yeah, I'm following the diet just fine. Here are my results. I weighed in this much, Friday or whatever. And we know from data collection, self-reporting on average is about 30% inaccurate. So when we look at the studies where people are inpatient led, and so they're only getting the food that's right for their test group, all of a sudden the lower fat diets outperform the lower carb. So in reality, you would have to say, wait a second, a low carb diet doesn't even work as well. And it has the most drawbacks in terms of sustainability and metabolism and so forth, even losing lean body mass. So that's why we fall on the side of a lower fat diet or a more moderate diet. You could make the argument for being a little bit more balanced. I'm certainly not for low fat as in you don't eat any. We still need to have some practicality, but you're just never going to see me say that a ketogenic, super low carb diet is the best, except for very small, infrequent medical conditions. There are cases for that. We're not going to get into it, but I know you guys are here for more your physique transformation and so forth. So anyway, so now we're back to how low is too low when we go into fat intake. And I like to say that mid-level 30 or so percent, if you remember the old research and books by Dr. Barry Sears from the Zone Diet, it was kind of the 30-40-30 craze. I think he's pretty right on the money for the amount that most people would use as a maximum. I definitely would not go any higher. But when you calculate the percent of calories that you're going to consume with 30% coming from fat, that's pretty darn high. If somebody just had to be on low carbs, then yes, you could go higher in fat intake. Excuse me. But if you're trying to lose weight, I think you can bring that number down to even 25%, 20%, even maybe as low as 15%. Then you're starting to get into an area where you got to be really, really, really careful. And so in the MacroDoc calculations, you're going to see that we range that based on some of the behavioral questions that you answered and what your goals are. And it's always going to be a little bit, if your goal is to lose body fat, fat's going to be a little bit on the lower side because we want to make room for carbohydrates. And I'm going to talk more about why that's important tomorrow. But for the interim, for now, just understanding fat intake, a couple major divisions are quality. And this does matter over time. So when you look at the information about unsaturated versus saturated, and the American Heart Association decades ago talking about keeping your trans fats lower because that even has an increased risk of cancer and so forth, all of that's true. Unfortunately, again, we're in this next fad, this next craze where people are saying, well, as long as it's whole food, it's fine. So I'm going to have whole milk, I'm going to have real butter, and I'm going to have bacon and all this, even though it's saturated because it's whole food. You know what? That's still what leads to heart disease and so forth. And some of it's fine, especially if you're exercising, training very consistently. Your body can utilize and metabolize a certain amount. And that's where the excuse is, well, my grandma lived to be 104 and she ate nothing but bacon and blah, blah, blah. And, great. She was also out, in a garden 12 hours a day and, washing clothes by hand and, all those kinds of things. So that's probably not the life we live today in large. But, again, if you're active in your training and so forth, then absolutely have some saturated fat. Just don't get on this kick thinking that it's better for you for some reason, because it's not. You still need unsaturated fats, particularly monounsaturated fats, because those are the things that reduce heart disease and so forth. So quality matters. Of course, we look at quantity first because that is the most important thing. How many of your calories are you getting from fat? How many calories are you consuming in general? That matters the most. But what I really wanted to focus on is making sure you know why we don't do a low-carb, high-fat diet. There really are advantages or wins on both sides, but even in the studies that show that a low-carb diet, even though it might be misreported that it wins a little bit, there are factors that can say, you know what, we do need to control our carbs. We can't just eat all the carbs we want and so forth. We still have to manage it. It still matters calorically what's happening in our body, all the way down to systemic inflammation and that kind of thing. So you really do get a little bit of a choice. It's not that one is the best and one is the worst. They're both two ways of dieting. One, the lower fat, keeping some carbs in, just happens to beat this lower carb version in almost every category, from a small margin to kind of a substantial margin. So I think you're going to feel better as you have more carbs in your diet and so forth. And keeping fat to a moderate level is really one of the easier parts of dieting, because you just have to look for those leaner sources, but it's not a matter of giving stuff up. I don't say, well, I used to have a cheeseburger for lunch, now I can eat nothing. No, now I can have a chicken breast, and make sure, even if I'm going to Subway, I ask for no cheese, instead of, the sour cream, ranch dressing, that kind of thing, I'm going to get regular mustard or this or that, something that's lower fat. You can eat the same amount of food, you're just getting lower fat versions. So that's going to make it easier, guys, so that you can keep room in for carbs, which have a much greater metabolic and anabolic effect, which we will talk about tomorrow. So thanks, guys. Have a great day.